All right, so mainly today we're gonna focus on the agreements that create the agency for you as a real estate agent, and it's primarily two that can create the agency. One of them is one of them is the listing agreement and the purchase agreement. And I think the two biggest ways that we can differentiate between the two, the first big differentiation is going to be that a listing agreement is a service contract. It's very similar. You're providing a service, and the big difference is that a listing agreement is a unilateral contract, whereas a purchase agreement is a bilateral contract. So let me explain the difference. The difference is that only one person promises to do something in a unilateral contract. The offerer in this instance is the owner. They're offering you a commission if you find me a buy if I find or the realtor finds a buyer. The broker or the agent isn't required to find that person a buyer. Maybe the price is too high. Maybe something's going on with the property. So the only person in a listing agreement that makes a promise is the owner, and that is a promise to pay the broker a commission if they sell a house. Again, the broker's not obligated to find them a house. Obviously, if they want to make the money, they're going to go ahead and do it. Whereas as a purchase agreement, there are two people that are pledging to promise something, and that's a bilateral contract. You have the seller saying, "I promise to sell you the house," and the buyer promises to give them, in this instance, in return, something of value, which is cash for the house. And so, two people in the purchase agreement promises to do something, and in a listing agreement, only one person really promises to do something. So a listing agreement is a unilateral contract, and a purchase agreement is a bilateral contract. Let's stick with the so definitely know the difference between a unilateral contract and a bilateral contract. A unilateral contract is, just remember the definition, is only where one party promises to do something, whereas a bilateral contract is something where two people promises to do something or more promise to do something. Um, Look at the prefix. Uni means one, bi means two. Now, the important things about listing contract is that it is a personal service agreement. Personal service agreements are not assignable. You cannot assign a service to someone else to provide those services that you promise to provide. Whereas a purchase agreement contract is could be assignable or it couldn't be assignable. It depends on if there's language in the actual document that calls for an assignment or won't allow an assignment. So that's very important to know that a listing agreement is a personal service agreement. It's an employment contract between the broker and also the seller. All right. So with that being said, two of the definitions that y'all definitely want to know in this is going to be unilateral contracts and bilateral contracts. So let's look at what we're gonna go over today. Let me get to that screen. We're gonna go over purchase agreements and listing agreements today, right here. Okay, so what are the key elements of a purchase agreement? And let me share my screen. All right, this is in that book that we have. And these are straight. I like this book because it's straight to the point. It's kind of going to give you the surface stuff, and then you need to take that and get a little bit more curious and Google or research or whatever you want to do to get more information or become more competent. But what are the key characteristics of listing agreements? All right. Excuse me. It's the broker's enforceable contract of employment. There it is again, contract of employment. The seller is hiring you for a commission to sell a house. All right. And it's enforceable because it should be in writing. It doesn't have to be in writing to be enforceable though. So there's some little bit of trickery here when we're talking about listing agreements and enforceable contracts and things like that. Um, I would just always get my listing agreements in writing. I don't want to take a chance and have an issue come up where I can't prove that we did really have a bona fide agreement. All right. Now, this is important about a listing agreement because really the listing agreement is one of the types of agreements that create the agency. All right. It defines the roles of the parties and the responsibilities of the party. It also creates the fiduciary duties for the agent. So soon, this is kind of like your indicator. The agreement is going to find the roles of the party, and soon as that agreement is signed, you have fiduciary duties to your principal. In the previous video, principal was one of our definitions that we needed to know. Fiduciary duties was one of the definitions that we needed to know. I don't think I might have said old car maybe a couple dozen times yesterday in yesterday's class. And it describes the agent's scope of authority. What that means is, if y'all remember yesterday, we were talking about general agency, special agency, universal agency. So on its face, when we're dealing with real estate, just the typical transaction that you guys are going to do, ladies are going to do, you'll be in a special agency situation, means that you're hired to do one specific thing, and that's to sell a house. Whereas general agency is going to be now and down here where it defines the agent's roles, describes the agent's scope of authority. That's where, okay, what else am I going to do anything else? If we outline that in the listing agreement, then we're not then just going to be collecting commission. We might be on a salary. We might be charged more to do those activities. And so this listing agreement establishes not only the agency, but it also establishes the agent's authority. All right. Now, who are the parties associated with the listing agreement? The listing broker. Now, remember, if you get a listing as an agent, it's not your listing, it's the brokerage's listing, and you're an agent of the brokerage that's allowed through your broker to act on behalf of the broker, and you get a commission for that. So, the listing broker is the fiduciary, and the seller is the client. So those are two words that you want to know: client, fiduciary, principal, those words, and have a good understanding of them. The listing broker is the fiduciary of the buyer or the seller client. And the reason why the listing broker is the fiduciary of the buyer and or seller client is because we have dual agency. The listing broker may have an agent that's representing both the buyer and the seller, or it could be an in-company split where that brokerage has two agents in there, and they're the ones um, um, facilitating the deal. All right. So the listing broker, the key thing here is that the listing broker is the person that actually has the agreement with the seller, not you as the agent. And the fiduciary duties are passed on through you from the agent, and you're going to represent a buyer or a client, depending on which side of the uh, representation you're on. And then sub-agency really is, this is to give you a real quick example of sub-agency. If, say, for instance, I had to go out of town for 2 weeks and I call one of you ladies up like, hey, can you manage these properties for me and give you some background of the properties and say, hey, this is the information that you need to know about the property. I want you to be well informed about some of the things that's going on with the property. You might have to show the property. You might have to do a open house on the property. And on the flip side, it may just be a buyer. Hey, I need you to take this buyer out and show this buyer some houses, or I need you to, if we're in contract, I need you to send some docs and stuff on my behalf because I may be out of town or away. You might get sick or something, and you're unable to perform your duties for your client. So that person that you assign those duties to is a sub agent. All right, they have the same fiduciary responsibilities as you. All right, they still owe that client old car: obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accountability, and reasonable care. Now, this next one's changed a little bit because we very rarely have customers now with the new law change in July, meaning that we're going to have an agency relationship immediately with the buyer and immediately with the seller due to the changes of the law. When you meet a buyer, they're wanting you now to fill out a buyer's broker agreement to spell out what you're going to do for that person, what type of agency that person's going to get, and what type of compensation that you're going to get. A buyer's agent agreement is very similar to a listing agreement for a seller, but it's called a buyer's agent agreement, and there's no house involved with the buyer's agent agreement and per se that buyer owns. They're looking for a house, and so customer kind of is going to go away. I think it'll always be mentioned, but the fact that the law changed like it did, and we're required to enter into some type of agency relationship almost immediately when we have a buyer, you're going to have your clients a lot faster than you would have in the past. What are your fiduciary duties? You need to know these like the back of your hand, and you need to know the definitions of them. And yesterday we went over a bunch of different things and ways that they're going to ask you questions about your fiduciary duties. Actually, I think if we answered, like I said, a couple dozen questions, at least 7 or 8 of them was about your fiduciary duties, or almost half of them. So that's how important it is on the test. Your duties again is OCAR, obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality. Where's confidentiality? Where is it at? That's not, I can't believe that's not up here. Which one of these would be confidentiality? Hmm. I don't know, I'm surprised I don't see that. But confidentiality is one of them. Reasonable care and accounting. Just know what those things are. All right. And if there was a customer involved, the only thing that you owe them is fairness and honesty. All right. And disclosure. So if you know some material facts about a property or a situation that would affect that person's decision-making process, you want to disclose that. Now, what authority does a listing agreement give you? An authority that it gives you limited authority. Most of the time, it's going to be outlined in the listing agreement, and typically is a very limited authority. And the only authority you really have is that you're going to sell that person's house. You might be allowed to show the property and a bunch of other things, but your authority comes from the listing agreement, and that's it's going to be limited, very limited. It's going to be to the point where you're going to only be hired to sell a house. Now, yesterday, and I didn't record this on yesterday's video, but I'll do it again today, is that there are 4 types of listing agreements that you can sign with a seller, right? By far, as we seen yesterday, most of those agreements are going to be an exclusive right to sell. Over 90% of listing agreements that are written are exclusive rights to sell agreements. The next one, exclusive agency, is a little bit different. Now, with exclusive right to sell, anybody, if that house sells during the time that you have a contract on it, you're going to get your commission. Then no matter who sells the property, if you got a listing agreement on it and that property sells, you're going to get your commission. Whereas an exclusive agency, it's the exact same thing that I just said about an exclusive right to sell. However, the only person that can sell it where you don't get your commission is the seller, right? About less than 10% of all listing agreements, or a very, very low percentage of listing agreements, are going to be exclusive right to sell agreements, and those must be in writing. Okay, exclusive agency must be in writing. Now, the next one is going to be open listings. Less than 1% of listings that listing agreements that you're going to get into are going to be what we call an open listing. All right. So that's the hierarchy that I want y'all to establish. Like, exclusive right to sell means everybody. That's the best one. Exclusive agency means everybody, but if the seller sells it, I don't get my commission. And open listing means that I got to open to all brokers. Any broker that wants to sell a property and bring a ready, willing, and able buyer will get the commission. All right. Less than 1% of the listing agreements that you're going to touch is going to be an open listing. And then the last one is a net listing. And virtually no listings are net listings because it can violate your fiduciary duties to your client. And in some states, it's illegal to have a net listing. Okay. A broker may not contract for the client unless specifically authorized. What the contract means is act like you're act like you're them, signing stuff on their behalf, using monies perhaps out of their account. Maybe they gave you like a petty change account or something like that, you're not allowed to do anything on behalf of the seller other than sell the house. You can't get into any other future agreements. You can't make decisions like extending the dates and stuff. The seller has to sign that type of stuff. You cannot contract for them. All right. In other words, you can't put them in a position where they have to perform something. All right. They are only the only ones that can sign and have them be responsible for performance. And then the next one is clients liable only for brokers act within the scope of authority. So if I hired you to sell my house, right? And say for instance, somehow, some way you rented the property to somebody and something happened to them when you rented the property. Well, that wasn't your scope of authority. And your that authority, you violated the agreement as an agent, and now you're liable for that agreement. All right. Now, if the act was within the scope of authority, the seller could be liable for whatever it is that happened. That would be something that where they would be liable for. So the key thing out of that section, I think, is that listing agreement is only going to provide limited authority, and that's to sell a house. And that agency is called special or specific. Remember that. Special agency is the type of agency relationship where you are hired to do one thing, and that's to sell a house. On the test, you're going to see special or specific, and they're interchangeable. They both mean the same thing, and depending on how the question is structured, they're going to use one of those words to try to trip you up and make you think it's something different. All right, just know that special and specific are the same thing pretty much in the realm of agency relationship. All right, and then the next one, contract law. It's a unilateral contract. I explained that means that only one person promised to do something, and that's the seller, the offeror, who's offering a commission to you if you sell the house. You're not obligated to sell a house. If you can't sell a house because it's too high or the condition, you have made no promise to do anything, and that's why it's a unilateral contract. Oral listings are valid and enforceable. They can be enforceable. Like I said, though, I would always get my agreements in writing. Now, exclusive listings, which is the one where the seller is the only one that can sell it and you not get your commission, in some states must be in writing to be enforceable. I get all my agreements in writing. And then remember that listing agreements are personal service contracts and they cannot be assigned. All right, it was a lot there. It's a lot of stuff that you need to know. And that little section right there it's probably going to be maybe a dozen questions associated with what I just read right there. And they may come out of agency, they may come out of contracts, they may come out of principles of practice. And so really, really understand what a listing agreement is. Now, the types of listing agreements there are, and I got a little video that I'm gonna play in regards to the types of agency listing agreements, and this is a prep agent video. So here it is, and let me turn my sound on real quick, share my sound. And we're going to talk about, we're going to watch listing agreements. Now, let me ask you, any questions about what I just went over? Was that pretty clear?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you good? Okay, so here we go. Let's listen to Joel from Prep Agent, and he's going to describe.
Today we're going to talk about the different types of listing.
First, let's go over what an exclusive listing is. In an exclusive listing, only one broker can be hired. The listing belongs to the broker exclusively. Because only one broker can be hired, there must be a specific termination date. It can't be 90 days from the completion of construction. It has to be 90 days from signing. If two exclusive listings are signed, the seller could be liable for 2 commissions. This is all stated in the contract. Remember, in a listing, there should only be 1 commission. The seller hires the broker to find the buyer, and that's it. People think there are 2 commissions, one to the broker of the seller and one to the broker of the buyer. Some people even think there are 4 if you include the agents. But in actuality, there is only 1. The broker of the seller gets the commission and then shares that 1 commission with the broker of the buyer for helping him or her find a buyer. The way that 1 commission is divided must be disclosed to the seller. The brokers will then share that commission with the agent who facilitated the transaction on their behalf. An exclusive authorization and right to sell listing is more commonly known, well, as a listing. I say that because your standard listing is an exclusive right to sell listing. You know, when you see one sign in the front yard on an open house that says for sale, that is typically an exclusive right to sell listing. The key element of this type of listing is that regardless of how a buyer comes to the conclusion that they want to buy the house, the broker is getting paid a commission. This helps avoid any potential conflict between the broker who is trying to solicit a buyer and the seller who hired them to list the property. To put it in more technical terms, the listing broker does not need to show that he or she is the procuring cause of the buyer. Next, we have an exclusive agency listing. Much like in the exclusive right to sell listing, the seller would only work with one broker. However, there is one huge difference. In an exclusive agency listing, if the owner sells it themselves, the agent gets no commission. That's right, nothing. This means that the agent would have to prove that they were the reason the buyer is there to buy the house. In terms of the real estate exam, the agent would have to prove that they were the procuring cause of the buyer. Imagine there was a broker for sale sign in the front yard of a house, and right next to it there was a for sale sign by owner. Thinking about that makes you realize why agents do not use an exclusive agency listing. If somebody's buying the house, the last thing you want to do is fight with the seller about who procured the buyer. Remember, if the seller can prove that they brought them there, under an exclusive agency listing, they will pay you nothing. Imagine if a seller wanted to sell a house and a broker came up to him and said, "If I bring a buyer, will you pay me a commission?" And the seller said, "Yes, of course." Then 10 minutes later, another broker came up to him and said, "If I bring a buyer, will you pay me a commission?" And the seller said, "Yes, of course." Then this kept happening over and over and over again, and the seller has agreed to the same deal with all of these brokers. Most probably, they would be using an open listing. Does not sound like a bad thing, right? Whoever brings the buyer gets paid for it, as long as they are the principal in the transaction or they have an active real estate license. The problem with this is, why would you as a broker spend time and money advertising somebody's house to find a buyer if there's a good chance somebody else will get paid and you will get nothing because the listing is not exclusive to anybody? You as the broker would have to prove that you are the procuring cause of the buyer. This can be very tricky to do. Imagine if every broker sign was in the front yard. How do you determine which broker sign drew in that buyer? This is just one of many complications with this type of listing. That is why you do not see this in a standard residential sale. However, there are situations where this type of listing is appropriate. For example, the developer or builder would enter into an open listing with brokerage firms in the area. They bring their buyers into the subdivision, and if the buyer buys, then they get paid. The last listing we're going to go over is a net listing. A net listing is when an agent agrees to sell an owner's property for a set minimum price. Anything over that minimum price belongs to the agent as commission. Thus, in a net listing, there is no stipulated selling price and no stipulated commission. For example, a property owner wants to obtain $500,000 for their property. If the agent sells it for $550,000, they make $50,000. Sounds great, right? The problem is that if the agent sells for $500,000, the agent makes nothing. The agent would have to manipulate the list price in order to earn a commission. This creates an inherent conflict of interest, making it illegal in most states.
All right, that was pretty clear. I mean, we've whipped this horse, and we've covered it a lot. So any questions about
Most people have no clue that in 2024, the best way to make money with Amazon is not with physical products. It's Amazon's other.
Okay, any questions about listing agreements? All right, so now that you saw the video, we're going to specifically talk about these different types of agreements. And these are all really definitions. And like we saw in the video, an exclusive right to sell is clearly the best one. 90% of the listings that you get or more are going to be exclusive right to sales. All right, it's given to one broker, usually must be in writing. It must have an expiration date, and the broker gets commission if the property transfers during that period. That's the best type of listing that you can have. Exclusive agency is exclusive accepting the owner. So that means that anybody else that sells that property outside of the owner, you will get your commission. It can be oral or written. It must have an expiration date, and the broker gets the commission unless the owner sells the property. Again, and the open listing is not exclusive. There's many brokers that's going to be associated with trying to find a buyer. It can be oral or written. It doesn't even have to have an expiration date. Procuring costs gets the commission. No commission if the client procures the customer or the seller or the owner. So that's an open listing. The net listing is all sales proceeds above the seller's minimum price. I'm selling my house. Shalonda, I want you to get me $100,000 for this house. Anything above that you can keep. All right. So the house sells for 105. Your commission is now $5,000 or 5% of the transaction. All proceeds above the seller's minimum price go to the broker. Discouraged if not illegal in some states. Okay. Multiple listing. Now, what is a multiple listing? It's really the place. So say for instance, once you get your listing, you got to start marketing it. And it's most of the time the first place that you're gonna start marketing it is in the multiple listing service or the MLS. A listing placed in the MLS, owners consent to rules and provisions of the MLS, and that's all spelled out in the listing agreement. All right. So the MLS is an exchange where people go to find properties that are on the market for sale. It's not a type of listing agreement. It's just a data source or data source where you can find listings and houses for property for people that want to buy them or rentals or things like that. Commercial properties sometimes are in the MLS. Buyer agency agreements, what are they? These are new, and they were new as of July. It's very similar to a listing agreement or a type of agreement that you're going to sign to with the seller, because this buyer's agency agreement is going to establish fiduciary duties, because it's literally a contract saying that you're going to do something and the buyer's going to do something. It creates a fiduciary relationship or responsibility with the buyer. If exclusive, the buyer agrees to work only with the buyer's representative in procuring a property. This is problematic because, like, say for instance, you get a buyer. I know some people that have signed buyer agency agreements for a day. I'm going to take you out and look at properties. If we find something, I'm your agent. The thing is, though, what people I don't think really thought about with this is I'm buying a house. I might be new to buying a house. I don't know really a whole lot about buying a house. And the first thing you're going to do is stick a piece of paper in my face saying that I'm obligated to do something. And I might not, and so it's very confusing, and it creates a level of trust that a lot of times you just don't have with that person, because you may be given to them through a lead service or something like that. But at the end of the day, what you really need to understand is that the buyer agency agreement is what creates the agency between the buyer and the agent that's going to be helping that buyer find the property. All right. And is going to establish the contractual obligations and your fiduciary relationship and duties that you owe to that buyer. All right. And then the last thing, it must have an expiration date along with other requirements of a valid listing. All right. So those are the different types of listing agreements and some other type of agreements that you're going to sign with either the buyer or the seller. Now, the next thing is that for the test, and I'm going to go back here. Where was that at? Let me see. Give me a second, ladies. Let me see if I can find it. All of y'all should have seen this package, if not already have it in your possession. I like to go here because agency is right on here. I think it's the second page right here. Yeah, so right here, what I wanted to go to and show you is, so do we know the agency relationships and how they're established? Write down, what I would do is write down agency relationships. And I would put under there special specific agency, general agency, universal agency. Those are the agency relationships. Types of listing contracts. We just went over all of those. We covered 1 and 2. Buyer, broker, tenant representation contracts. We're going to cover those more. I'm going to actually cover those in the state section. I'm going to go over there today too, because I want you to start. I want to start kind of merging the state agency, because remember, agency is created by the state in which the property is located. It's not a national really type of it's not a national really, it's not like a federal level. It's a state level agency established by that state. That's why each state has their own licensing requirements. So, but buyer brokers agreement, we went over some of those agreements. You can have an exclusive a buyer broker agreement. You can have a non-exclusive buyer broker agreement, but I wouldn't be signing anything other than an exclusive buyer broker agreement, because I'm not going to be wasting my time showing you a house. Whereas you might go out the next day and see a house with another agent, um, and now all of our work that I've done is for naught. All right, so we've covered that, but we want to go a little bit more into that, so we can't put a complete check mark by that one. Other brokerage relationships, including transaction brokers and facilitators. We haven't gotten to that yet, but we are going to talk about that. Power of attorney and other assignments of authority. All right, that's going to go kind of in the relationships. And then actually the listing agreement is going to establish that authority. All right, that contract that you sign is going to establish that authority. Now, here's what I came here for. Conditions for termination of agency or broker service agreements. That's why I came here, and that's what we're about to go over now. I think it's here. Where's that? Right here. Okay, so right here it says compensation. So let's go over compensation real quick. Negotiated between agent and principal. The listing, and that's really what that's saying is that commission is negotiable, or compensation is negotiable. There's no flat fee or anything like that. You can charge somebody 10% commission if you want to sell their house if they sign it. You might not, you're probably not going to get them to sign it, but you could. So the key that what I'm trying to say is that there's no cap on the commission that you can charge someone to sell their house. All right. Where disputed amongst agents, agent with procuring causes owe commission. Now, we were just watching that prep agent video. The speaker kept saying procuring cause. That simply means who is the person that brought the person, who's responsible for bringing that buyer to the seller? Who procured that buyer, right? And you got to be real careful with this. This has always been a big deal in real estate, because just to give you an example, now here's another thing too. The benefit of the buyer broker agreement that I was talking about is that you'll have an exclusive relationship with them. And if they buy a house during that period, you get that commission based on the agreement that you signed. Now, what used to happen back in the day, and this happened to me, and it was a nightmare, because I made a huge mistake. And I honestly shouldn't have did it, but I did do it because I'm just that type of person. If I don't catch something and it was due to my competency, then I'm going to take care of it. But back in the day, it wasn't even back in the day, earlier this year, you could be working with a person, and this is what happened to me. I'd probably showed this person like a couple dozen houses, like 30 houses. One of them, we actually went in a contract on the house, and it was an issue with the roof, so we got out of contract. And when the agent sent over the mutual release, they said the earnest money was supposed to go back to the seller. I didn't catch it. She signed it. I sent the agreement back to the selling agent, and it was $1,000 earnest money. And the reason why we were getting out of the contract was because the roof would cost $8,000 to repair, and she didn't want to assume that responsibility. And so when we got out of it due to the inspection, but when the agent sent the mutual release over, obviously they're going to protect their client, and they said that the seller is to get the earnest money. Again, I didn't catch it. She didn't catch it. I ended up having to give her back $1,000 because I'm just that, like I said. So she signed it. One can say she signed it. You should have read it and you agreed to it, and now your money's gone. But I didn't do that. But it gets even more interesting. When we get out of that deal, she's riding around the neighborhood, and the thing is the phones make this stuff even easier. She riding around the neighborhood, and she sees a house that she likes, and the agent was just putting a sign in the yard. She went into the house and talked to the agent and said that she likes it, and the agent told her that if you like it, I can make sure you get it at the listing price. And when we were looking for homes, stuff wasn't really selling at the listing price. It was selling over the listing price. So she jumped on it immediately, and the agent showed her the house and everything. Now, etiquette in the industry, that agent should have asked her if she had a realtor, but she didn't. And that's just proper etiquette. But a lot of people in this game don't do it. Let me tell you one of the reasons why. A lot of times when y'all get done with this class, wherever y'all gonna go for your brokerage, it's gonna be tough, and you're gonna have to be on your stuff, period, to really make money. And you really want to make money in different ways in real estate. But when you first starting out, it's gonna be rough. All right. You're gonna need a mentor, you're gonna need somebody to bounce stuff off, you're gonna need somebody to help you with the docs. And all the time your broker is not gonna be ready. Obviously, y'all know y'all can call me. So when you starting out, you want to make sure whatever time that you have, you're getting compensated for it. And so um, the big thing is that the etiquette in the game has just changed. And when you're first starting out and you don't have a whole lot of business, what people tend to do, and I strongly disagree with it, is they join teams. So she was on a team, and she knew that if she brought the buyer, she would then get the majority of that money, whereas the team had already had the listing on the other side. So what she did was she had the listing broker, the listing agent that was the lead of the team list the property, and she, as a co-agent from the same company, represented the buyer, right? So now that caused her, in my opinion, to act unethical and not even really care if the buyer had a realtor. So procuring calls, so I called her. I said, yeah, my client said that, and she wasn't even a client at that point because we didn't have to sign contracts. I said, but my buyer had said that you showed her the house and this, and I said she really likes the house. She said, yeah, well, if she wants it, she's going to use me as the agent because I showed her the house. I said, you didn't ask her if it was if they had a realtor? She says no. So I wrote her name down. I got a book with people's names in it, and I'll never do business with her. Right? I will never do business with her or probably even that team because you just don't do that type of business. Because here's the thing. I've been working with that buyer a long time, and it's not really even anything about how long I was working with her. I'm going to represent her behalf better than you are because you're associated with the seller. And that actually ended up happening in this deal where I think it was some condition issue where she had to negotiate on and represent the buyer. And it really wasn't just real good negotiation. She wasn't really looking out for the best interest of the buyer. And I told her that I says, hey, you're not going to really be able to represent that buyer. Um, you're not really going to be able to represent that buyer, right? What you have in some sort of affiliation with the seller. It was very incestuous. It was like you're associated with them already. And so at the end of the day, what I'm trying to tell you is procuring calls is serious. You may lose commission if you are not able to prove that you were the reason why that buyer bought the house. It used to be a big deal. Now with these buyer agency agreements, I imagine that it's going to be way less instances where that happens. So compensation, what I'm getting to is the compensation first off is negotiated between the seller and a broker, to get the compensation, you have to be responsible for bringing that buyer, right? Or whoever procured with the procuring cause of that person buying the house is they're the ones that owe the commission. I haven't seen many procuring cause questions on the test recently, or any of our questions that we went over. I just haven't seen any. All right, and so know what procuring cause is. I haven't seen it on the test, but just know what that definition is. And then the next bullet point is based on the result, find ready, willing, and able customer. All right, and if you do that, you get your commission. Now, some people. Now, let me ask y'all a question real quick. Based on that last bullet point, if I am the listing agent and I say, for instance, I marketed it and I did all this stuff, and a buyer came along with their agent and they put an offer on it, and we're getting ready to close. And you say, you know what, I'm having cold feet. I don't want to sell a property. The buyer loan is approved. You got to clear the close from the lender, and the seller just reneges. Do you get commission if that happened? Anybody?
Are you guys at the closing table or
Oh yeah, we yeah, oh yeah. We
close?
got to clear the close. We got the seller, all they have to do is sign. The buyer may have already signed, but the seller don't sign and they renege. As
Yes.
an agent, you get your commission. Yes, you do get your commission, because what did you do? You found a ready, willing, and able customer to buy the house. You get your commit, even if that house don't sell. If you found a ready, willing, and able customer, you get your commission. And they're going to ask questions like that. Now, I have seen a couple of those questions. All right. Now, that's compensation. That was actually more thorough than I have ever really looked at that, but it's a lot in those little 3 bullet points. The next thing, and based on our pamphlet, you need to know is what are causes for termination of a listing agreement or an agency relationship. In this instance, we just went over listing agreements, so we're going to keep it on listing agreements. Where is it at? Right here. We're on listing agreements right there. But what is the compensation? I mean, not compensation, but what are causes for termination? Now, this is a tricky one right here. So write this down. People don't think like once the house is sold, that you've done your job. The agreement is terminated at that point because you have done your job. The buyer performed, the seller performed. So that terminates the relationship. So performance terminates the relationship. All right. Infeasibility. Infeasibility will terminate the relationship because, say, for instance, it's just not possible for us to sell a property for some whatever reason. Say, for instance, there are some condition issues that just will not allow the property to be sold. You might find, like, especially around like on the lake shores, West Coast, or when I say West Coast, west of the river or east of the river, any houses like in Euclid, Lakewood, West Cleveland West, and those areas, even some portions of Cleveland have houses on the lake, and there's erosion. So say, for instance, there's erosion and it's just not popular. Like, you're not going to sell a house. It may be something due to condition, it may be some other terms, but that's what infeasibility means. Another thing that terminates an agreement is mutual agreement by the seller and the buyer. I mean, I'm not the seller, by the seller and the broker. All right. Or now the buyer and the broker in terms of that buyer agency agreement. Hey, for some reason, it's just not working. I want to get out of this relationship. You agree. Y'all sign a mutual agreement releasing each other from your obligations. And that's how that will terminate that agency agreement. It should be always in writing, especially if it's a listing. Revocation, you're just taking it completely off the table. It's like, hey, I'm revoking the listing. I'm not selling the house anymore. I'm good to go. All right. Abandonment. Abandonment is, say, for instance, you have a customer and you can't contact them. They're never answering the phone. They're not responsive. You got people trying to see the house and they can't schedule showings and things like that. And you don't know what's going on. I had a situation where somebody was incarcerated and I couldn't get in contact with them because of that. They can't sign any of the agreements or anything like that. So it's very difficult to sell a house when that is the situation. So that may be considered abandonment. Clearly, a breach will terminate a relationship. You promised to do something, or let's just put it like this: you promised to do 5 things, and they promised to do 5 things. You didn't do everything that you promised. You breached what you promised to do. That's a violation of the agreement, and that could end or terminate the relationship. All right, clearly expiration. What that means is every agreement should have an expiration date. If the listing agreement expires, that's going to terminate the agency relationship on that expiration date. Obviously, invalidity will terminate the contract, and that's simple. You need to, when you hear invalidity, you need to think about what are the things that make the contract valid, right? The 4 things. If one of those things isn't there, that contract is terminated, or it may be something that comes later in the transaction. Maybe you had a valid agreement, and then later some subsequent event caused the property to be or the contract to be voidable. Incapacitation or death, I don't think I need to explain that too much. If someone dies and it's a listing agreement, especially in service agreements, you can't assign them, or death or incapacitation ends or terminates the agency relationship. Involuntary transfer, that's going to be like a foreclosure. The key here is involuntarily, like you didn't volunteer to do it. You got it. The property was foreclosed on. It might have had a mortgage. The mortgagee didn't foreclosed on their loan, or some other reason the property was transferred, and you didn't necessarily agree with it, or you weren't the one that started that action or facilitated that action. And then the last one is going to be destruction of property. If the property is destroyed to a point where you can't sell it, or some major damage, that's going to terminate the agreement as well. So know the things that's going to terminate the agreement. Definitely know that performance is going to terminate the agreement. Mutual agreement is going to terminate the agreement. Revocation, breaches, the expiration, and then death are the ones that I typically see for the test. So definitely know what's going to terminate an agreement. And then the next section that we're going to talk about is the agent's performance. May perform, and this is going to be redundant. An agent only may perform the tasks they're authorized to perform and competent to perform as well. Must verify owner and property data. So in other words, say for instance, you get a listing and you're talking to the missus. She don't even tell you she's married. Or say for instance, she's married, but they're separated, and she signs the listing agreement, right? You can go in and you want to ask her, are you married? Yeah. Or you may go to public records and see that there's 2 owners. It's her and then co-owner, her husband. You probably want to get his signature as well to have a valid contract. All right. And then you want to make sure she's telling you that's a 5-bedroom, but you went to public records and it says 3, and then you visited the property and it was 3. A lot of people like to call like attics and stuff bedrooms. It may have the utility of a bedroom, or it can be used for a bedroom, but most of the time that's a finished attic, right? And that's an appraisal concept. Say for instance, somebody may say, "Man, I got a 4-bedroom," when they really have a 3-bedroom and a finished attic. So you want to verify that type of data, because someone could say, "Hey, I thought this was a 4-bedroom, and and it's a 3-bedroom, and it's a finished attic associated with it." Like sometimes in finished attics, they have different heat sources and leads, and it's just something that you want to be diligent about. And the way that I put it is, you want to know what you're selling. All right. And then the last agent performance is going to be may delegate duties to a salesperson and other brokers. Okay. So that's that sub agency stuff. When you delegate duties to a salesperson or other brokers, that may be considered sales agent. So here's revoking a listing. Now, key part of this is clients always have the power to revoke the listing during the period. All right. They can revocation. It'll terminate the listing, and they can take the listing off the table from you. However, they may incur liabilities for commission or damages. Say, for instance, you spent a lot of money marketing it, and In the contract, you said that you were going to spend that money as long as they allowed you to sell a property. Well, they cut the contract short. So what'll happen is you may be able to go after that seller for damages. Now, you wouldn't be able to sue the seller. The broker would have to be the one to sue the seller and pursue those damages. All right. So really, y'all, that's it on listings right there. So it was a lot of information. Everything that I went over, I would know, period. Like I would know everything right here by the back of my hand. Right. I'm going to skip over brokerage because I'm going to come back to that because I want to go straight into purchase agreement, which is down here, sales contract. It's called a sales contract. All right. The first thing that we're going to start back just like we did when we was talking about the listing agreement. The difference between a listing agreement and a sales contract or a purchase agreement is that one is unilateral, where one person only promises to do something, and whereas a bilateral contract where two people promise to do something. So a sales contract is a binding bilateral contract to purchase and purchase and sale. All right, that contract is entered into through the buyer that signed or made the offer and the seller that signed and is the offeree. If the seller counters that buyer's original offer, then those roles shift. The seller then becomes the offerer and the buyer becomes the offeree. Know that. All right. Now, here's an important, this is one of the ones where I don't think they go into enough. The enforceable blueprint for closing. Literally, there's a few people that's going to look at that purchase agreement for guidance. Clearly, obviously, the buyer and the seller need to look at it because they have things to perform in that agreement. So it's their blueprint of what they have to do. The title company needs to know what y'all agreed to. If this is a multifamily property, are the tenants on, what type of lease are the tenants on? What if does the tenants have security deposits? All of that stuff would be in that contract, and the title company and escrow company needs to know how to allocate those monies. If this is like it might be a single family house that's rented, but it is the blueprint for closing. It's the instructions to a lot of people of what's going on in that contract. The appraiser actually gets a copy of the contract because they need to know what chattels associated with it, or if there are anything that's considered outside consideration. What outside consideration is like if you promise to do something else above and beyond the money that you're paying. I'll give you an example. Personal property. Say for instance, you bought a property in a rural area and you got a couple acres, and that seller had a ride mower, and the ride mower was included actually in the price. Well, the appraiser is not going to include personal property. They're there to appraise the real property. So um, the the appraiser needs to contract to see the terms and conditions of it, of the agreement. If there's anything that they need to consider in terms of just knowing, maybe the sales price is low, and in the actual agreement it says that this property has a foundation issue. Now the appraiser is aware of these agreements and also the condition issues. So it's the blueprint for closing. It's the instructions to a number of people on what's going to happen during the transaction. All right. Here's the next really important thing. Write these two words down. You need to know the difference between an executory contract and an executed contract. An executory contract are items that you and I promise to do, or you, the buyer and the seller, promise to do that just haven't been done yet. Right? When you get the signature from the buyer and the seller then signs that same day or whenever or later or whatever, as soon as that seller signs and they have that meeting of the minds, that contract is now a bilateral contract where two people are promising to do something in an executory status, meaning that there's still things for each party to fulfill based on that contract. Sales contract expire upon closing. So when everybody has done everything that was required of them to do, that contract expires or is terminated on closing, right? And that contract, when that happens, is called an executed contract, meaning that all parties that were responsible for performing their duties based on what the contract's language says has performed everything that was required of them in that contract. All right. It must be in writing. You can't verbally agree to buy and sell a property. It must be in writing for it to be valid, and it must be in writing for it to be enforceable. I'm sorry, it don't necessarily must be in writing to be valid. It don't have to be in writing to be valid. It just needs to be in writing to be enforceable. All right. For validity, it must contain those things that make a contract valid. Valuable consideration. It must identify the property either through a legal description or a parcel number. You will see a question on there about that. It might come in agency, it might come in contracts, it might come in property ownership. But know that you have to identify the property, and it must be signed by all parties that involved in the transaction that has interest in that property. All right. Now, moving up here. Creation, deposit, and contingencies. What's creation? Creation is created by the unqualified acceptance of an offer, means that there are no caveats, there are nothing. We had a meeting of a mind and we agree to everything that's in that contract. It gives the buyer equitable title, enforces and power to enforce specific performance. Remember, specific performance is legal, a legal remedy. So there's a lot of definitions that's starting to come out of what we're going over. Know what equitable title is and know what specific performance is. Remember, the creation of that purchase agreement gives the buyer equitable title. Honestly, you can't sell that property, or the seller can't sell that property to anyone else if it's under contract. Because we know that if the buyer performs the duties that they're required to from the contract, then they are going to get the property. If you do not sell it, they'll probably sue you as the seller for specific performance in court, where the court will order the sale of the property based on the terms outlined in the contract. All right. So know those two. Know that the offer has to be unqualified, or it's not a meeting of the minds. And when that buyer signs and that seller signs, the buyer now has an equitable title. And in a sense, that contract puts an encumbrance on the actual property, because the seller can't do anything with it until there's a mutual agreement or to release the contract, or it sells, or like the seller, once the seller signs that contract, that buyer gets equitable title and has an interest in the property. Now, here's the thing. Here's another key component of a listing agreement. I mean, a purchase agreement. The purchase agreements are assignable because they are not service agreements. It's an agreement to buy or sell a property between a buyer and a seller. So the buyer could assign the property to someone else unless it's specifically outlined in the contract. If you do not want a property to be assigned, you should put it in a contract. All right. The next one, deposit and or earnest money. Okay, what is it? Secures contract validity and buyer's equitable interest. Most contracts, now remember, what is earnest money? Earnest money is a pledge to show that I'm serious. It's not consideration. Earnest money is interchangeable with liquidating damages, right? The buyer is pledging to the seller that if you sign this contract, I'm going to put 1,000 or 15 or whatever the earnest money down to show you that I'm serious. Actually, here's the contract and here's the $1,500 to show you that I'm serious. The earnest money or deposit can vary in amount. There's no rule of thumb of what you have your clients put up as earnest money. However, I'm going to do something to the point where it's not ridiculous for my client to put up. Now, in the previous market that we were in, the earnest money, people start getting crazy with the earnest money. They're buying a $200,000 house and putting, $10,000 of earnest money down or something crazy like that. I'm not ever going to have my client pledge that type of money for a $200,000 house. Actually, I'll probably have to be over 500, 600,000, close to $1 million before I get them to pledge that type of money. I just follow a simple rule. If it's within 0 to 1,000, $500. If it's between 1,000 and 200, we can go 1,000, $1,500. Anything over 200, perhaps 2,500 or $2,000. But I'm not having my buyer put a bunch of money down, and I know that once they put that down, the only way they can get it back is if it's mutually agreed to by the seller and the buyer. So it varies. What I'm getting at is earnest money varies in the amount that can be pledged. And then the last bullet point, deposits controlled by disinterested party who must act according to escrow instructions. All right. The earnest money is going to be deposited into what we call escrow, right? So just a role play, you got the contract signed by both parties. The contract calls for the earnest money to be delivered within 4 to 48 hours of the signing of the contract or the agreement. The buyer should have that money wired over or taken to that escrow company or title company, one and the same. Title companies have the escrow company typically are one and the same. And so you have them take that money to the escrow to the title company and deposit that money. Typically, what happens is once the escrow or the title company gets the deposit, they will email both realtors, the buyer and seller, saying that the earnest money was received, and you need to send a copy of that to the seller and the buyer if you were responsible for submitting that earnest money. The next one, contingencies. Well, we know that contingencies are conditions that must be met before the contract to be enforceable. One of the more popular contingencies is the inspection contingency and the finance contingency. If this property doesn't inspect to the point where I'm okay with the condition, I can get out of the contract. If I'm not able to find financing that is reasonable, I can get out of contract. So the two most popular contingencies that's put in the contracts are sale or purchase agreements are going to be for finance and also what did I say? Finance and what's the other one? What's the other? I just said it. Okay, did y'all hear what I just said? Finance and what? And the inspection, right? And then you
Inspection.
had a brain part right there. All right. So those are contingencies. It's just pretty clear. Don't complicate this stuff. It's conditions that must be met for the contract to be enforceable. It must be clear. It can't be like all types, like I said, like you're writing in old English or something like that. Most of the time, you can get most contingency done within 1 or 2 sentences. And the inspection and the finance contingency are canned in the actual a listing of purchase agreement. And what I mean by canned is it's just like a line in there, and it's pretty much all purchase agreements in regards to the inspection and finance. I must have an expiration date. The contingency must say 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a week, or whatever, but it can't be on into perpetuity. The next one is going to be required diligence to satisfy. Like you just can't put a inspection contingency in there and then don't get the inspection and then talk about the house isn't going to meet your criteria. Well, you didn't have anybody professional come out here and look at it. You know, if you put an inspection contingency in there, then you should have an inspection. The finance contingency in there, like say for instance, you say I need 3 weeks to make sure that I can get loan commitment, and you never even apply for a loan. Like you can't say I couldn't get financing and you didn't even go apply for the loan. All right. So that's what they mean. Required diligence to satisfy. Buyer default. Seller can cancel, claim liquidating damages or their earnest money, or sue for specific performance, i.e. the buyer's deposit. All right. Claim liquidating damages. So those are the remedies for a buyer default. The seller can just get out of the deal, say, you know what? Just sign this mutual release, you BSing. I'm gonna get out the deal. You dragging your feet. You said you were gonna do this, and then you're not doing it. Claim the liquidating damages, which is the earnest money, or sue for specific performance, which is a legal remedy that where the court makes the seller, the buyer perform. Okay. The next one is seller default. Now, it's very hard for a seller to default. Period. Right? So the buyer can cancel. Now, if the seller defaults, the buyer can cancel the agreement, just get out of it and move on to another property, or sue for damages or specific performance. but it's very hard for a seller to default because most of the time the seller has really very limited things to perform outside of, say, for instance, you had the inspection and there's a bunch of repairs that need to be done, right? The bunch of repairs that need to be done, if the seller ain't selling it, then that could be considered that like a breach. All right. So any questions about that section or the key characteristics of sales contracts? Okay, I'll keep it moving. Now, this is one area where I didn't really cover a whole lot of, but I think it'll be helpful for you to know. In purchase agreements, it must outline the parties, who's the buyer, who's the seller. It must outline the consideration, something of value, what's being exchanged, and it must be something of value. All right. It must provide a legal description or identify the property through a parcel number or a legal description. It must have the purchase agreement must have prices of the price and terms. Okay. I'm going to buy it for $100,000 cash. I'm going to buy it for $200,000 and I'm going to use a loan. I'm going to buy it for whatever and I need seller financing, but it must have a price and the terms associated with how you're going to pay for it. All right. The next one is loan approval provisions. All right. Loan approval provisions means that if you say that you're going to get a loan, conventional or FHA or whatever, it could be a private money loan. You need to be able to outline those provisions. Sometimes it's found in a pre-approval letter or whatever, but that loan approval provisions must be in that purchase agreement. Now, primary clauses, earnest money is not required, but that is a clause that you're going to pretty much see in every real estate contract. Earnest money is pledged to show that the buyer is serious about buying the property, and if they don't do what they say that they're going to do, due to whatever reason, as long as it's not a contingency, then they could possibly have breached the contract, and really the seller is entitled to that earnest money. Escrow. How are the monies that's associated in this transaction going to be handled? So most purchase agreements are going to have some escrow clauses. I'll give you an example. Like I told you with the security deposits and stuff like that, when you have a rental property, escrow, it'll say, it'll have instructions for the escrow, like, withhold $800 for the security deposit. It may have, okay, the monies are going to be handled by this escrow company, but there are going to be some clauses in a contract that's going to outline the escrow responsibilities. Okay. So it says closing and possession dates. Closing and possession dates, what that means is what date are we going to close and what day are we going to take possession? Those are two different things, because say, for instance, I tell you before you go to buy the house, I'm not going to be able to transfer you this immediately because I still need to find me a house, right? So closing and the possession dates may be two different dates, right? And so they'll have clauses in regards to closing and possession dates. What is the interest conveyed? Is it fee simple? Is it some limited type of interest? What is conveyed that should be in the contract, in the purchase agreement? It should also tell the buyer and the seller should also indicate what type of deed is going to be used. Is it going to be a general warranty deed? Is it going to be a special warranty deed? Is it going to be a quitclaim deed? Receivership deed is going to tell what type of deed that you're going to get in that actual document. Title evidence, that's going to be information about the title work, the title search to make sure that you're getting the property free and clear of any encumbrances. And so that's going to be in that purchase agreement as well. Property condition, warranty disclosures and stuff are going to be in there as well, in that contract. Something about closing costs. The buyer's going to pay this amount in closing costs and the seller is going to pay this amount in closing costs. It should be in the actual document. Damage and destruction clause is going to be something in there that says if the property is damaged or destroyed, what happens? Default. if one of the parties breached, then there's some information in that contract that's going to tell what happens in the case of a default. All right. And the last two, brokers, agency disclosure, and who pays commission should also be in that contract. Okay. And finally, the seller's representation, property condition, and marketable title should be in that contract. So these are also all of the elements and variables that make up the contract. And then most of the time, you're going to see these clauses in the contract. Now, we're done with that part. Okay. This is going to be a whole other section when we get to options and deeds for contract for deed. We know an option, just real quick, an option gives an optionee the right to buy at a given time and price. The optionee must pay for the option right. It's a unilateral contract and the seller must perform if the buyer says they want to buy. So that's what an option agreement is. And then contract for deed is just another way of saying land contract. All right, and then that's going to really finish up. But I don't want to go into this because this is going to be the third agency video because I really want to spend some time on options, transaction brokers, facilitators, and those things. And I'm going to do it here and there and in this. So now, the most important section of the test or the test is going to be agency because there's a bunch of this stuff that's going to come out that's going to come out in the state test too. All right. And that's what I'm going to go over next right here. Let me find it real quick. And actually, I think it's easier really to understand when you're looking at the state stuff than it is when looking at just the national stuff. Where is it at? It's actually a section, I believe it might even be called agency. Joe. Okay, that's not it. I think it's down here somewhere. All right, here we go. Right here. So this is going to be the state test, but it's going to really help you with the national section as well. All right. Types of relationships in Ohio. Again, remember, agency is determined by the state that you're in. All right. So the state of Ohio is going to let you know what are the permitted agency relationships. All right. You got the seller, landlord agency. That's between a license and a licensee and a seller. All right. What that means is it could be a license to sell a property or to lease the property. You'll have an agreement with the seller when they're leasing it, they're not selling it, or the landlord. So there's a relationship between the agent and the brokerage, between the seller and the landlord, between the licensee and the seller, the broker and the seller, I should say. And then you got the buyer tenancy agreement. Say, for instance, you are not the one representing the person who wants to sell or list or lease the house. You're the person that's representing the buyer and the person that's the person that's going to rent the house. It's going to be the same as the other one, minus the seller and the top one and the buyer. So it's going to be an agreement between the licensee and the buyer. Now, remember, we didn't hear anything in agency that we just covered in regards to dual agency. Dual agency is going to come into play a lot in the state. You'll see some on the national test as well, but definitely know what dual agency is. It's a relationship between the licensee and both the seller and the buyer, and it must be in writing and disclosed before you get into that relationship. Dual agency is serious. You can get your license revoked for not disclosing it. It completely violates the trust of the public. All right, so know what dual agency is. Spend a little bit of time on sub-agency too, because you might get a question or two about sub-agency. What is sub-agency? It's the relationship between a licensee and another licensee's client. All right. Like I told you, the example of like maybe I'm going out of town and I need you to handle my affairs with my listings, and I tell you some stuff about the properties and the owner and the seller. You are now a sub agent because you're going to be acting in the place of my shoes. All right. So know what sub agency is. Now, what is split or designated agency? All right. Split agency. Now, what we call it in the industry we call it in company split. Say, for instance, I'm at Brick House. An agent over at Brick House let's say one of the guys that I know real good over there is a guy named Silky. You know, Silky has the listing. I bring a buyer. We're both with Brick House. That's called an in-company split. I don't want to confuse y'all on this, but it is considered dual agency from the brokerage's level, not the actual licensee's level, because that brokerage is representing both the buyer and the seller. So that brokerage would have a dual agency situation, not necessarily the agents involved. All right. Now, designated agency, let me hold on, let me see. Let me think. What was that? I wrote it down over here. Hold on, give me a second. I'm gonna show y'all something too. But I'm not gonna put it on the computer. All right. Let me see something. I'll put it down here somewhere. Give me a second. Oh, these are all questions that I had got together for y'all too. I'll go over these too. These are all agency questions, and there's no answers associated with them. There are answers to them, but I didn't put the answers on here. I just want y'all to critically think about these questions, and we went over a lot of them yesterday, but I, I wouldn't really go crazy. Oh, right here. In designated agency, not part of the same brokerage. What must the agents disclose about their relationship with their clients? So designated agency is not a part of the same brokerage. Right here, I put it right here. I wouldn't necessarily be real crazy about really knowing a whole lot about designated agency, but you want to, yeah, I'm right here. So, but let's just read what it says here. When a brokerage represents both seller and the buyer as dual agency, but one licensee in a brokerage is designated to represent the seller, and the other licensee is in the same brokerage is designated to represent the buyer. So designated agency. So say for instance that you had like the broker got a list and then they assign you to the buyer and assign another agent to the seller. That's kind of like designating who's going to represent the buyer and seller in that agency. Or say, for instance, something happened to an agent, like they moved on, the broker gets the listing and they can assign or designate a person from the agency to um, represent that person that's associated with that brokerage and that relationship. Okay. Um, let me see here. I'll get back to that before we conclude. Agents in an agency relationship includes the licensee's affiliated broker. Let me just read through these here real quick, so I'll explain them. The brokerage management level is licensees, affiliated licensees who receive confidential information. What that means right here, this one here, is if you could be indirectly in the know of something, and you should keep that confidential. And in a sense, you could be considered a sub agent in that. All right. Affiliated licensees who help establish the agency relationship may have an agency relationship with whoever they helped establish it. Affiliated licensees are who are appointed to represent the client on behalf of the clients represent the client with the client consent. All right, and then the last one is no other affiliated license is an agent in a relationship. All right, so these are items that we don't necessarily see a whole lot of on the test. But what I would the two that I would know is the affiliated licensee who receives confidential information could be considered a sub agent or an agent in that because they know stuff about the property and they're associated with the brokerage. All right. Um, the first one is going to be where, say, for instance, like y'all all know which y'all might not all know which brokerage y'all going to go to, but there's an agency relationship created between you and your broker, right? And that's a relationship that is going to be when you sign your employment agreement with that broker. That is saying that you're my broker, I'm the agent, and we have a agency relationship through that agreement that we signed. Brokers management level employees may have that same similar relationship. They're just not realtors. Excuse me. And then so these are just definitely know if you receive confidential information, you could be considered a sub-agent in that situation. Licensees who help establish the agency relationship, maybe they have something to do and involved in helping you find that client, and they could be considered like a co-agent in that situation. But these aren't things that we typically see. This is kind of like overkill. And remember that this is the state portion. They go over creating agency. So that's why like contracts, we had 3 sections, and I actually felt like I wanted to do another section for contracts, but agency's probably going to have about 5, right? Um, and so creating agency, here's a couple of things, other things to remember. Payment or promise of payment to a licensee does not create the agency relationship, all right? What creates the agency relationship is the contract. And that's the next one. Agreement need not to necessarily be in writing to create agency. What that means is, remember, I wrote down on here, imply agency through your actions. You could be creating agency. It could be an expressed, it could be an express type of agreement where it is in writing. But again, when you're creating agency, I would definitely get it in writing, period. Written agreements must meet all the requirements, and the requirements of a written agreement is what? It's 3 things. And we go back up here, which it requires that you have I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong part. But it is going to require that you have identify the property through the legal description. It has to expire, and it has to have some sort of consideration. All right, let me see here. Where we at? I think I went right here. That's where we were at. Now, where we at? Copy of the written agreement must go to the client in a timely manner after signing, immediately, especially in the day of electronic document handling and stuff like that. That may be a question on the state test to say a copy of the written agreement must go to the client in a timely manner. You should be giving that to them immediately after they sign it. Back in the day, we would have signers at the office. We would simply go to the printer, copy everything that they signed, give it to them, and we were good. Whereas now we can send them in electronic files. Those are recognized by the laws of the electronic signature, and they're pretty much acknowledged in every state in the country, and they'll get their copies immediately upon signing. And then the last one, no implied agency exists based on providing information regarding marketing to lenders or attorneys. So that's not an implied agency if you're doing those actions right there. It doesn't necessarily say that you're an agent of someone if you give information regarding marketing, or like you talk to lenders about information, or attorneys. You may just be getting some sort of information from the lender. You might be asking an attorney about some legal information and that type of stuff. So just create what creates agency. And this is just another like, because this is totally different than what you see in the state, the national portion, but this is the state portion, and you want to know this. And if you know all of this stuff, it's really going to become helpful when you're just taking both portions of the test. Here's another, and it's a little bit more detailed. Types of listing agreements: exclusive right to sell, most common agreement. Agent receives commission regardless who brings the buyer, prevents the client from working with other agents during the contract term. Exclusive agency: seller may find the buyer and not owe the agent a commission. Great definition. Open listing may involve multiple agents with only the agent who finds the buyer being paid commission. Net listing: seller sets price with an amount above that price going to the agent as compensation for services. Not illegal in Ohio, but highly discouraged. So it's not illegal in Ohio to do net listings, but it's highly discouraged because it's likely to violate fiduciary responsibilities. So here's a great little section about the types of contracts. All right. And now here's where I said I was going to talk about more buyer brokers agreement. Like right up here, we got 4 of them. Exclusive right to sell, exclusive agency, open listing, net listing. Know these. Definitely know these. Buyer agency agreements is only 3 of those. We have an exclusive right to represent. What is that? The most common. Buyer may not hire additional brokers, provide compensation for brokers, even if the buyer finds a house on his own or through another broker, unless the buyer collects commission from another party. All right. I'm sorry, unless the broker collects commission from another party. So let me read that again just to make it clear. It's the it's the most common agreement. The buyer may not hire additional brokers, meaning they can't, you got them under contract, they can't go to another broker until that contract expires. Now, you may not want to be signing like 6-month agreements with the person because you're going to be obligated to them to help them find a house for 6 months. Like I said, I know some people that sign one day a buyer broker agreement. I'm taking you out today. We're gonna look at some houses. Any of those houses that I show you, you want to make an offer on, we can make an offer on and then buy it. There's really no real hard, fast rule about how long you should do it because this is very new. But an exclusive right to represent is very similar to an exclusive right to sell, where it don't matter who sells that buyer a house, you're going to get commission for it because this makes a person say, do you have a realtor? Right? And if that person lies, then there's nothing that other person can do about it. But that still establishes a broker relationship between the buyer and that agent. It says provides compensation for the broker even if the buyer finds the house on his own or through another broker, unless the broker collects commission from another party. The broker may be fired only with permissible cause. Contract terms is months to a year. All right. Non-exclusive right to sell is going to be slightly opposite than that. All right. It defines the broker's duties to the buyer, includes buyer's obligations, provides compensation for the broker for finding a house unless the broker collects commission from another party. The buyer may hire additional brokers, typically cancel only with specific reasons. So this one here, they can operate with multiple brokers to try to find a house. All right. And then the non-exclusive, not for compensation contract. The buyer may hire additional brokers, include the broker's duties, allows cancellation by either party at any time. Broker is not paid. All right. So say for instance you're under a non-exclusive not for compensation contract and you show a property to a person and they see it and they want to buy it, but they buy it with another agent. Well, you got a non-exclusive not for compensation contract. All right, so you may not get paid in that. So just like in listings, you want to have an exclusive right to sell. With this, you want to have an exclusive right to represent contract. Okay. Now here's some of the things: written agency agreements to be included in written agency agreements. It must have an expiration date. Oh, this is the agency agreement. So now we're getting into a whole other level of agency. Now this is going to be like the Ohio agency disclosure form. All right, and this is what this is. So we are going to come back to this. I'll cover this in that next section because this is going to go over the documents that when you get your first client, you're going to have them sign an agency agreement. You're going to have them sign the consumer guide to agency relationship. And then you're going to and this is what's telling you that must be in those forms. All right. And those are required state documents. Here's some of your fiduciary duties right here. It's just to me, it's more spelled out in the state section than it is in the national section. Licensee's duty to clients and customers. General fiduciary duties to clients. Here's your old car acronym right here. And there's some other bullet points that we want to provide some duties. Advise and I'm down here because we already know loyalty, care, perform, obedience, perform duties in a way that's loyal to the client, comply with all requirements, statute, rules, and regulations, disclosure. But you also, when needed, advise the client to obtain expert advice when appropriate. All right, accounting is another one. All right, that's a fiduciary duty. Accounting, account for all monies and property received in which the client may have an interest. And then obviously confidentiality, we know what that means. What are your duties to the seller? Here's your duties to the seller. These are just good things to go over. Seek a purchase offer with the price and terms acceptable to the seller. Present all purchase offers to the seller in a timely manner, even when the seller declined to sign or didn't receive the agency disclosure statement. What I'm going to do is these are some really good points, and I don't want to mix this with the stuff because this is going a little bit outside of the realm of really what I'm trying to get across to you ladies, which is going to be the types of agreements, All right, the types of listing contracts, what creates agency and relationships in Ohio, because that's really what we're on. Yesterday we was kind of focusing on, we talked a lot about just the definitions and things like that. We went into the different types of listings and things, but this is the state section. So the next class, I'm going to put the consumer guide to agency relationship, the agency agreement in there and in that video that we're going to do. We got probably about another 10 to 15 minutes. So what I wanted to do is show y'all again. Oh, let me show. Well, here, let me do this real quick. All right, so these are some buyer agent questions. What's this one here? Under an exclusive buyer representation agreement, that's what we just talking about. That's the best one that we can have when we represent a buyer. If a buyer finds a property on their own and wishes to make an offer, how is the broker typically compensated? Hey, you went on an exclusive. I still get the money because guess what? You found the property, but I still got to help you traverse through all of the different things that you're required to do in that purchase agreement. And I got to write the agreement. Right? You're not an agent. You can't write the agreement. I mean, some people still practice real estate without a license, but these are just different buyer's questions. Under a buyer broker's agreement, when is the broker entitled commission? Those are things that we need to talk about without seeing the damn answers, because there's no retention or limited retention when we see the answers, because it's kind of like they're narrowing it down to us. I want y'all to just generally know that and be able to talk about that without seeing any answers. All right. Dual agency questions. Now watch this. Look how many different dual agency questions I've already been able to find just by going through all of the different stuff that I was looking at. These are all dual agency questions, all of those. And then look at this. Define the meaning of dual agency in real estate. What does dual agency refer to in real estate? In dual agency situations, the agent's fiduciary includes. They want you to know all of these different things. A property manager hired to oversee a property, handle leases, and manage repairs is most accurately described as having what type of agency relationship with the owner. I got that out of place. So as I read them, I'll move them to the right ones. This is going to be a general agency relationship. Here's another one. What is the most crucial action a broker must take in a dual agency situation to comply with the ethical and legal standards? So now I'll ask that question. Y'all, we got to get active. If we start talking to each other, y'all gonna pass the test. Like, I honestly encourage y'all, like, say for instance, Kiana, you're gonna take the test, say for instance, in the next month or so. And Tanisha, you're gonna take the test, say for instance, in the next month and a half or so. Y'all should at least be able to get together. And I'll give y'all my Zoom account. Y'all can go in and schedule it and be like, hey, we need the Zoom account. Y'all can start it and go in there and set it up and get all that stuff and just meet with each other on Zoom. You ain't got to meet in person and just talk it out. Like, hey, let's go over some questions real quick. Let's do an hour. Like, the more involvement that y'all do in terms of input is going to go a long way. Because back in the day, we didn't have Zoom. So I remember I was studying with a lady that I was working with. She didn't pass it on her first chance. She passed it on her second chance, but I wouldn't have passed the test on my first chance. But I would not have been able to do it because the type of person that I am, if me and you say that we're gonna meet and study, and I know that you're there all the time, I'm gonna do my best to try to be there all the time. And it just gives a different level of dedication. And so get you a study buddy, man, and just call on the phone. You ain't gotta be here. Let's just, hey, let me get your number. You taking the test in a month, I'm taking the test in a month. We at the same skill level. You don't want to be practicing with somebody that just got, I mean, you might, because you can teach them. If you can teach it, you know it. All right, but see, these are all dual agency questions, and what I started to find out is that they're asking y'all the same questions, just backwards, sideways, upside down, and y'all just got to know how to look at that stuff. So those are all dual agency questions right there, and I'll have this already. And what I did this for contracts, I did this for agency. So These are some, now here's some other sections. Agency relationship questions. What's agency relationship? Well, that's going to be your single agency. That's going to be your general agency. That's going to be your universal agency. Here's all the questions for that. Look at how many questions it is for that. And some of these things are out of order. Yep. Let's see. What is the primary obligation of the agent to the client? Like all of these things, I would go and individually look at this. And if I know what is single agency, what is sub agency, what is the primary purpose of agency disclosures in real estate? So these are all those types of questions. General agency questions. Look at that. Termination of agency questions. Transaction broker questions. Listing agreement questions. So I'm gonna give this to y'all and like read them and like be like, hey, do I know this? Do I think you should know everything on here? Yes. But when you get to a certain section, you're gonna say, I know that. They just asked me this differently. So once I organize this, y'all can take it and just like do, just I would just challenge myself like give this to somebody and then they'll ask you a question like under buyer broker agreement, when is the broker entitled to commission? You're supposed to sit back and be like, and tell them. But on the sheet, it's going to have the explanation. Like this is a real long explanation. I'm not going to get it to that long, but it might just have this paragraph right here. All right. And you ask them like, okay, I don't know exactly. Well, give me a hint. And then they'll read it to you. See, that's really what it is with us. We know 75% of what we need to know about that specific question, but it's just some holes in that we need to bring it all together. And I'm just trying to throw as much paint at the wall as I can to help y'all get over this hurdle and passing this test. Because a lot of the stuff you're not really going to ever use. It's sad that you're not going to ever use when you get outside of this session. And so that's really it. I got to organize this. This will be available for y'all to just look at. A bunch of fiduciary duty questions, old car questions. These are all of the things that remember when we went, where did we go? Where's that over here? Where's the pamphlet at? Where is it at? Where did I put it? Right here. All right. Agency relationship questions. Well, I got a bunch of agency relationship questions. Types of listing contracts. That's in there too. Buyer broker. That's in there too. We got questions about that. And so on and on and on, we got these different questions. And then back over here, so there's another couple of things up here. Disclosure of agency and representation, disclosure of possible conflicts of interest or self-interest. All right. So agency is a very, very important thing because it's the thing that creates the contractual agreement in your fiduciary duties. It is really the heart of everything, right? We figure out what type of service we're going to provide to the principal. We put it in an agreement, and that agreement creates the agency based on what we've talked about, right? So that's and then here another thing too, right here you see, and this is probably more than 13%, but there's a lot of questions on there. So this is about 10 to 11 questions. There's 80 on there. So yeah, it's about 10 to 11 questions that's all going to come to agency, and it's going to be out of one of these different things right here. All right. So any questions, ladies? Anything y'all want to ask me?
No, but if anybody want to study on Saturday, I'm willing to meet up. I try to do at least a couple hours on Saturday, studying.
Okay, and I'll send out like a text like, hey, I'm gonna just send out a text like, hey, y'all, because here's the thing too. It's very difficult, and I don't care if it's one person show up now, right? I'm gonna record it. If you go back and watch the video, because what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tell you to go watch the video. I can't do I literally, other than going to take the test, I don't think I can do much more than doing the videos, going over thousands of questions, answering any questions that y'all have, trying to give y'all real life scenarios and things like that. So I will send out a text message saying that, hey, it may be a good idea for a couple of y'all at the same skill level to get together and try to study this test and get a study buddy and try to schedule the test at the same time. That way y'all under the same gun, for lack of better words. right? Hey, Shalonda, you taking yours on the 10th? I'm taking mine's on the 10th. That's 30 days away. We both got to get it done. And you'll put pressure on Kiana. Kiana will put pressure on you or whoever you study with. And as long as you agree to that, y'all will be done, man. A lot of this stuff, y'all won't even worry. I would get on CompuCram, I get on PSI, I get on Prep Agent, I'll get my Google machine out and come up with like an agenda with each session. And you don't got to even be here that long. Hey, girl, let's talk about, man, we got 15 minutes. Let's talk about just the types of contracts there are, so that's it. That's it. So, y'all got any other questions or anything?
No.
All right. All right, ladies. I'm going to post this video, but just keep hammering away at the definitions, and I will make those questions available for y'all when I'll make those questions available for y'all when I organize everything. All right.
Thank you.
No problem, ladies. Anytime. This is going to end this session and a recording. I got to end that, so we're done with that.